So, salam alaikum to all. I was expecting to see the brother, what's his name? Shinqiti. The brother who spoke yesterday at the debate.
He's here.
Where is he? Is he here?
No, he wasn't.
No, he wasn't. He told us to focus.
I wanted to basically take the chance of this conversation to continue the dialogue and the conversation, you know. Anyway, he's not here. I would just do it, you know, without him. But just wanted to, because I think there is a major, it's related to the topic, because the topic about international migration, we cannot discuss international migration without a full and deep understanding of what racism means, you know. And the problem is that we have all kind of definitions of racism that are very problematic in the moment we think, for example, let's begin to say what racism is not, okay? The first thing racism is not is a prejudice or a stereotype, okay? This is a typical Western-centric view, okay? That thinks of racism as some kind of stereotype or prejudice towards people, you know, and the moment you take that definition, you fall in the hands of Western modernity and Western liberalism. Why? For a simple reason. Because if you think this way, and this is kind of the move made by the West today, is to say basically that then the problem, the racists are always some extremist people. Like in the case of France, you know, people from Nacional or neo-Nazis in other parts of Europe, or Ku Klux Klan in the US. And therefore, the mainstream of the society is not racist because they don't have these prejudices, okay? But there's always a minority of people in the society with these prejudices, okay? That's one thing. One thing that then this definition leads you to think that the problem is just a problem of some prejudice in the head of people, okay? And leads you to think that then the problem of racism is just some marginal issues, not a central problem, okay, of the world today, okay? Second problem is when, if you take that definition of prejudice, then of course the West will say to you, well, listen, there's been prejudice all our lives, and I can cite you poetry, Persian poetry, you know, Arab poetry, Chinese poetry. I can go back in history to claim racism has been there since Adam and Eve, okay? And the moment you do that, then you are doing a kind of transhistorical analysis of human constructions, okay? And to talk now in Islamic terms, the moment you make human construction transhistorical, you make them idolatric, in the sense that you make them part of human nature, a creation of Allah, okay? And the moment you take that line of thought, you are in church with the best intentions of the world, okay? Even if you are anti-prejudice, all of that, because in that sense, you're taking as a creation of Allah, you see, something that is nothing to do with the creation of Allah. It has to do with human creation, human understanding, you know? And so, because what I'm trying to draw is the implications of saying that racism is prejudice. Because this prejudice, you could claim it all the way back to the, you know, the first humans that habitated the planet, where you can always find prejudice and you know, and this kind of conflicts everywhere. You know, you have all this stuff, you know, but this is human creation. But of course, the problem is that it can turn into a vision of human nature the moment you see it as a transhistorical thing, okay? Now, the problem with the definition of racism, the problem is that racism is not just a prejudice or stereotype. Racism, to have racism, you have to have institutions. Institutions, political, social, economic institutions, enforcing okay, certain effects over a group of people, a population, okay, that is going to affect their life in a significant way. That is, their rights, their rights are being violated, or they don't have access to same resources, or they're being discriminated in the labor market, or so you have to have institutions, social institutions, affecting. Otherwise, if racism is just a prejudice or some stereotype I have in my mind, it won't affect the life of anybody, because I don't have power. You see, if I don't have the power to affect the life of anybody. To have the racism, you need to have institutions, okay, that have power, that are then enforcing, okay, and affecting the life of people. Okay, this is very important because if you take that definition, you could have situations where you could have, let's put it, I give you examples. You could have a police, okay, as an institution, let's say in a place like France, that goes and beat up people of color, in this case Arabs and black people in the banlieues of Paris, for example, and it's a racist institution, but then you do a survey over the policemen who are beating up people, you could find that in terms of prejudice, you could find a lot of police that are not prejudiced, okay? That are not necessarily having any prejudice about the people they're beating up, okay? They could even pass the test of being non-prejudicial people. But they are the ones beating up Arabs and blacks because they're receiving orders, okay? So you need to have institutions enforcing. So racism is always institutional. It's always structural, okay? Otherwise, it just I can have a prejudice about anybody in this room, okay, in my head, but that doesn't affect your life because I don't have a power over you. You see, I don't have any institutional power that will enforce on you any of my prejudice in my head. You get the point? So it just stays in my head as a prejudice. To have social effect, to have unique institutions enforcing these things, even if individuals inside the institution might not be prejudiced, might have no prejudice. You see the point? So I'm just making this example just to mention how in the literature when we talk about racism, I'm talking about social sciences, it's always talking about institutional racism, okay? And it's never this thing about some kind of, a stereotype or some kind of prejudice of a group of people over others. You need to have some kind of power relations there that are going to affect the life of people, okay? This is the first basic thing when we discuss, questions of racism. And this is part of the debate that was going on yesterday because we were using different definitions of racism. So he was not seeing the relevance of racism, of calling Western modernity racist, okay, because he could see prejudice in many other societies before, you see? But the problem is that in Western modernity, especially after 1492, with the fall of Granada and Andalusia and the European colonial expansion, you have a new logic of organizing, as I explained the first day, in my talk on Monday, I assume you were there, about at one moment in time and in history, you have this racism enforced as an organizing principle of the political economy, of the, how the question of race becomes an organizing principle of state power and political economy. And that's the moment I mentioned when Columbus put there the question of having a soul or not, okay? So the first moment of racism was not color racism. The first moment of racism was a theological kind of racism, that they were classifying population based on the question, you have a soul or not, okay? People who did not have a soul were dehumanized and put below the line of the human. But this is not just a prejudice of Columbus, it's that he came when he arrived to the Americas, he brought with him together military power, cultural power, political power, etc., that enforced this idea into the people they colonized. You see? So there were institutions. So if Columbus would have written that as a prejudice and say, oh, these people have no religion, that's what he wrote. People without religion at that time have no God. People have no God, have no soul. And people without soul are like animal-like. Okay? So this is the way the imaginary, Christian imaginary at the time were functioning, you know. But if he would have written that in his journal and would have stayed in his journal that way, okay, then it would have been it would have no relevance. It would be like, oh, another text like Persian poetry, etc. Look, he has prejudice about indigenous people. But the problem was that it was not just in his journal. It became a state policy, imperial state policy. And that's when then it has effects over the populations there. You see? That's when you have then racism. Okay? That they inferiorize, dehumanize this population, and then put them in a situation where they were, super exploited, etc., etc. Now, there was exploitation before 1492. There were empires before 1492. Okay? Forms of domination, forms of, etc. But the form of classification of domination did not pass through the question of you being an animal and some people being humans. Okay? So this classification is a modern colonial classification. Before, you have many forms of power that will oppress people, will exploit people. You could see that in history, both inside the Muslim world as well as outside the Muslim world. But those forms of power were the form of classifying the people they exploited were passing to other kind of discourses. Okay, it was not exactly the question that you are below the line of the human, you are animal-like, etc. Okay, this kind of question you could see in poetry, you could see, like he was saying, you could see in some texts, okay, here and there, but it was not state policy. It was not a social policy. You see, it was not the hegemonic domination policy, institutionalized as a policy structuring a social relation. You see, it was in the head of some people, you know, and you could find this here and there. But it was, you could call it prejudice, you could call it stereotype, you could call it whatever, but it was not exactly, you cannot call it exactly racism because that was not institutionalized as a policy of organizing the political economy, okay, of those societies. Okay? We can go to the Ottoman, we can go to the Chinese lineage, to the Ottoman Sultanate, we can go to the Aztecs, we can go around the world to examine the different forms of power around the world, and you could see that this question of the humanity or non-humanity of people was not a central question. Okay? And the way these other forms of power operated or classified population was not along those lines. Okay? It was along other lines that I don't have the time to develop, but you cannot collapse in a trans-historical way, you see, categories of Western modernity and make them universal in the sense that now they are everywhere since the origins of humanity. This is part of the Western-centric view that is making categories that today becomes commonsensical, okay, and make them universal in a trans-historical way, you see. When in fact in history you have sharp discontinuities, okay, across history, because you have different social systems, you have different, different societies, different political form of political authority, different, etc., etc. No? Second, next thing I want to say about what racism is the following: you don't have there's no one single form of marking racism. There are many ways in which you can mark racism in the modern colonial history. Okay, this form of marking, you know, the marker, you have today as a kind of common sense in many places the question about racism being related to color. Okay, because in many parts of colonial history, of Western colonial expansion, color became a central marker of race. Okay. they classify population based on color. But it's not the only one. You could see across colonial history many ways through which European colonial empire classified population in their colonies using other markers, not necessarily color, okay? One of them, and this is fundamental for our discussion today, religious identity, okay? They use religious identity as a marker of inferiority below the line of the human. I mentioned in the first day how the moment that religious prejudice, discrimination of the Middle Ages turned racial, remember in my talk the first day, that is Islamophobia, Judeophobia, that goes back to the Crusades, European Middle Ages. It was a form of religious prejudice, but it was not yet racial, okay? First, because I mentioned the question of conversion was open. That is, the question was not, it was still open because, I mean, they will kill you if you resist, but if you convert, even if by force, they will respect your life, you see? But the problem was, when the question of having a soul or not, that is a question that comes from the expansion to the Americas, comes back to haunt the conquest of Andalusia, okay? And start redefining the old medieval forms of religious discrimination to racial, because they start calling Moriscos that are non-Muslim now, these are the descendants of the Muslim, second, third, fourth generation, that are now Christian, born, baptized as Christians, and now they bring a new question that is more fundamental than having a different theology, okay? Which is, your humanity now is in question, because you are soulless people. This is the phrase they use here in Granada and in the south of Spain in the conquest of Andalusia during the period of Moriscos in the 16th century, before they were expelled in the early 17th century. You know, in 1609, Moriscos were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, okay? But this moment of the 16th century was a fundamental moment, because then they brought this idea of people with soul or not from the conquest of the Americas, from the way they classify indigenous people there, and then redefine all medieval Islamophobia, all medieval Judeophobia they happened to use to. In here, Marrano, the one converted to Christianity, remember those who did not convert were either killed or have to run away to North Africa, okay? So those who stayed were forced to conversion. So now you have Christians, descendants of Muslims, descendants of Jews, classified now in a new way, because now the question is, those who come from that background, there's a suspiciousness now if they are humans or not, okay? And now the concept of soulless people is going to classify them below the line of the human, okay? And that's the moment when Islamophobia and Judeophobia turn racial. It's not anymore, see, I can read you a text of the 13th, 12th century, okay, about Muslim or Jews from the Christians, and if I don't pay attention to this conceptualization, I can do like the brother did last night, read into the writing and say, oh, they were racist already. No, because they were prejudiced, they were stereotyped, that was a form of discrimination, but it was a form of religious discrimination where the question of the human was not the central question. You see? What brings the expansion to the Americas is what is called by Nelson Maldonado Torres, a decolonial thinker for the Americas that was sitting here in the back yesterday and was the last one who spoke here yesterday in the back. He calls a metaphysical catastrophe. A metaphysical catastrophe, because he's saying that now, for the first time in world history, you're going to have a system that is going to operate at a global scale, where the question of the humanity of other people is going to be a fundamental classificatory question, okay, of the population. What you do in the political economy and how much you work for what you do in the political economy is going to be organized along racial lines, okay? So you're going to be, and I mentioned the debate of Las Casas and Sepúlvedas in the mid-15th century, where you have this debate between Sepúlveda Las Casas along the question of having a soul, people without soul, the line of Sepúlveda, and people, barbarians to be Christianized, the line of Las Casas. But these these courses are going to continue all the way to 19th century, when the authority of knowledge moved from the church to pseudoscience and turned into people without soul, turned into people without, the human DNA. Barbarians to be Christianized in Las Casas turned into people that, primitive people to civilize, okay? Primitive to be civilized, okay? So this is like a secularization of the Christian theology of the 16th century that was already modern. It was a modern debate, because that kind of debate did not exist before. I mean, if people have soul, that kind of thing did not exist before. There was slavery before, there was domination, there was, I don't want to romanticize or idealize the past, there were all these problems. But it was not organized or classified in the same way as modern times. That's why you can get someone born a slave in Muslim civilization. I'm not defending any kind of slavery, by the way, but someone born in Muslim civilization as a slave would end up being the sultan of the place. That was inconceivable in modern racial slavery, what is called cattle slavery, okay, by the West. Okay, that a slave is born a slave, if they escape, wherever is captured is a slave. There's no way out. Okay, in Muslim civilization, for example, just to give you an idea how this is very different. Okay, it's a qualitative different when someone is born a slave and can become a sultan. In the process of the land, there were several examples of this. So I'm just mentioning this. This is very important for the kind of debates we're confronting today, because if we are not clear about that, we Muslims, we are the first one going to be complicit with this kind of forms of colonization. Well, I'll give you an example. One of the things they're saying today is that the West didn't do anything new in doing this Atlantic slavery, because it was already done by the Muslims, it was already done by the Romans, it was already done by the Greeks. And therefore, slavery, racism is not new. It's been by the Muslims, it's been there by the Greeks, it's been there by the... And so, part of the rhetoric of Islamophobic discourses today in the West is to claim that the West didn't do anything original. They just continue doing what the Muslims were already doing. And that's a complete distortion, because there is a sharp distinction from Muslim civilization, okay, with all the criticism we can make to that, what happened in the post-1492 period, okay? Because first, Muslim slavery in Muslim civilization, or slavery in the Roman, or slavery in the Greek civilization, etc., was not racial, okay? Was not racial slavery, okay? That's the first distinction. Second, in modern civilization, slaves have rights. Okay, that's another important distinction. It's not, again, there was someone saying, "Oh, you're defending slavery." I mean, when Hatem was responding to the fact that no, we're not defending slavery. We're just saying you cannot collapse history in this, make this, how can I say, plain out history in a way that is like everything is the same across times. No, you cannot do that. You need to understand the shift in history. Even though we might be using same terms, it has different meanings according to different social systems across history. Islamophobia, as I said, in the European Middle Ages, do not have the same meaning as Islamophobia in the 16th century in Europe, because there is this shift from religious discrimination to racial. Slavery, even though it existed in Muslim civilization, in the Roman or it doesn't have the same meaning as modern slavery, okay? Because modern slavery was racial and was capitalist, okay? Was capitalist. They were bringing massively Africans, kidnapping Africans, and bring them by force to the Americas, okay? And the question of race was a fundamental organizing principle of this process. Okay, that's why someone born a slave in the Americas, it was inconceivable that would end up being the governor of the colony or something like that. Okay, that was inconceivable. Okay? So I'm saying these things because we need to be very, very careful in terms of the way we go about narrating history. Why? Because there are narratives that are being today deployed that's coming out from Eurocentric premises that have long durée over the past 500 years. And the sad thing is how, because we don't have alternative histories or decolonial histories, we buy or fall into the traps of repeating these things, okay? And don't see how this narrative become today important narrative in the process of racializing populations, especially Muslims today, with the return of, the word return is really problematic. It's always been there, Islamophobia as a form of racism, okay? Since the 16th century, you cannot, but today, because racism is posed as color racism, you see, you have today the debate in Europe where the French state, for example, in the European community, have intervened to say Islamophobia is not a form of racism because it's a religious, Islam is a religion, and therefore, in any case, a religious discrimination is not racial. Because they're defining what is race for them, color racism, you see? So there are many colors inside Islam, and therefore you cannot claim that this is race. You get the point? But the problem is that that racism have many markers. One is color, the other one could be religious identity, the other one could be ethnic identity. The question, ethnic identity or language, you could mark it in many ways. Take the example of the Irish. The Irish were racialized by the British Empire. They couldn't racialize along color because they don't have the same color. How did the British racialize them, that is, inferiorize them below the line of the human? Using religious identity. Protestant, Catholics. And when you see the narrative of the British about the Catholics, it's the same narrative they use about blacks in America, the same narratives. So the point I'm trying to say is look at how, first, the correlation between colonial history and the emergence of racism as an organizing principle of the political economy, but also look at how the markers could be different in different parts of the world, because you cannot, in the case of the British in Ireland, they could not use color. It didn't work, okay? And, so they use what? Religion, okay? And as a marker, okay? Protestant Catholic. Irish were the Catholics, and they were considered inferior, below the line of the human, with the same kind of qualities they put forward about blacks and Americans, okay? You could read those texts. They were even in the socio-biological kind of texts that were put forward all the way to the 60s, eugenics. Irish were together with Africans, and with Asians, and with, etc. in the British Empire. So this is very important in terms of to understand how racism works, because the marker is not the definition of racism. So if racism can be defined, can be marked in different ways, then what is racism? This is the question. If I can mark racism with color, with religious identity, with ethnic identity, then what is racism? This is the main question. But racism, following the perspective of critical thinkers of the Global South, such as Frantz Fanon and others, is an institutional power structure, okay, of superiority, inferiority along the line of the human. Okay? It's an institutional power structure, superiority, inferiority along the line of the human. Okay? So the marker could be religion, could be ethnic identity, could be color of skin. But what defines racism as a fundamental structure is the classification of the population, superiority, inferiority, along the line of the human. Okay? So you push down below the line of human people along ethnic identity, along religious identity, along color marker, etc. You have many markers to do that. In colonial history, you can find many markers along these lines. Okay? But there is a major shift, and this is the point I'm trying to emphasize, between Islamophobia or Judeophobia before 1492, in the time of the Middle Ages, that was a form of religious discrimination, and after, when the question of the humanity of the people are put in question. Okay? And this humanity, first it was put in question along the lines of having a soul or not. Later, this just acquired its own dynamic and its own development using other markers, not just if you have soul or not, but ethnicity, ethnic identity, talking about indigenous people in different parts of the world, or color, or religious identity, etc. Okay, so I always, when I hear, I saw in the front page of Le Monde in the month of December, they put a study there that the French government did, saying French people are more Islamophobic but less racist. That was a survey they did. Millions of dollars in this survey. But wait a minute. I mean, ABC of the definition is very, how can I say, problematic, because they're making Islamophobia a form of religious discrimination, like in the Middle Ages, you see, and then racism something else, because for them racism is based on questions of color, you see. And so they make an opposite, or as if one thing and nothing to, so they say they are more Islamophobic but less racist.
What if I'm Arab and Muslim?
What?
What if I'm Arab and Muslim? So, you are racist against Arabs, but you are racist against Muslims, not against Arabs. So,
yeah, but the problem is that in the context of France, these things are very much tied together. Okay, the identity of Arab, Muslim Arab, etc., is very much tied together. Even though we know that not all Arabs are Muslim and not all Muslims are Arab, we know that very well. But in colonial history, for the French and the French imaginary, these things are very much tied together. But the problem I want to pay attention to is how, in this survey, they spend millions of euros in this, and they conclude they're less racist, okay? But more Islamophobic, But the problem is that this line of Sepúlveda and Las Casas, you have in the line of Sepúlveda the people without soul to people without the human DNA. Today we call this the biological racist discourses. And then on the other side, you have the Las Casas civilizational cultural discourse, where, barbarians to be Christianized, to primitive to be civilized, all the way till today that we call it cultural racism. That is, these are the two forms the West have used, and the more and more politically the biological racism has been contested, the more and more the cultural racism comes in to replace it. Why? Because it's politically incorrect to use today biological racist discourses, you see, they are now using a form of racism where the word race is not even mentioned. And this is the form of cultural racism, where you inferiorize the population below the line of the human, but using cultural markers. That is, you are a savage, you are terrorist, you are suspicious of terrorism, you are, these kind of things that push you as some kind of, barbarian below the line of the human, okay, with a marker that will not talk about race. Race is not even mentioned as a word. Why? Because in the eyes of the law, if you use the word race, it's problematic, because you could be accountable in the eyes of the law. After the Nazi occupations of Western Europe, you cannot use the word race in public arena to classify a population. It's being illegalized. It's associated with Nazi Germany. So it doesn't mean that French institutions stop being racist. It just shifted from the biological form to the culturalist form. And the same thing happened in the US and Britain with the civil rights struggles, where once it became illegal to discriminate against people using biological racist discourses, then they shift to the culturalist racist discourses in which the word race is not even mentioned. Okay? So I'm giving this as a broad discussion about what it means, what racism means, because I find problematic. We cannot discuss today questions of migration without an understanding of what exactly racism means. I have to add a few other things. The way racism operates is dividing the world between the superior and the inferior, okay? But that side of the world that is called the superior, and that side of the world is called the inferior, here comes a concept that is used by Fanon, where he said, Frantz Fanon, where he says, people you could make the following formula. The line of the human on top, S of superior, equal H of human. They're the humans, they're the standards. Equal zone of being. Okay? I don't have where to write this, but equal zone of being. Below the line, you make the I of inferior equal non-human or subhuman, and that non-human, subhuman is very important because it's about divide and rule. Okay, subhuman, non-human. But they are both below the line of the human, but then colonial powers always put one with a little privilege over the other to divide and rule and put them to fight each other, even though both are below the line of the human, oppressed, okay, by the West in this sense, okay? And then you have equal what? Zone of non-being. So zone of being, zone of non-being. What does Fanon mean by this? This is not the Heideggerian being, non-being, etc. This is something else for Fanon. For Fanon, that means that racism is not just and only a form of a classification of population for the purposes of discriminating on the side of the market that is in the economy or on the side of political citizenship rights. It's not only, it is that but it's more than that. That's why he put there zone of being, non-being. It means that all the forms of living, all the forms of being, all the forms of thinking, all the forms of brain, all the forms of spirituality, etc., of the people that are considered superior, equal, human, become the standards, become superior, the normal way of being in the world. So that's why the concept of Fanon of racism is very important. It takes us to other dimensions and how profound this question of racism is. It puts forward the question of being, that is zone of being. That means the people who are above the line of the human are now considered the superior because they also have the best epistemology, the superior epistemology, the superior pedagogy, the superior spirituality, the superior everything, the superior aesthetics, the superior, I mean, you go over the line. So it's not just superiority, inferiority, because now you're going to be, you know, this is going to be used to exploit you better or to discriminate you in terms of citizenship rights, politically, etc. It's more than that. It covers a whole range of social existence, okay, that is going to now be placed among those in the zone of being whose forms of living, thinking, praying, etc. is considered superior, and those who are below the line of the human, whose form of being, thinking, praying, etc. is going to be considered inferior, savage, barbarian, etc. And the standard of humanity is going to be measured from the point of view of people in the zone of being. So the closer you are to that standard, the closer you are to being a human. The more far away you are from that standard, the more animal-like you're going to be. Okay? So this classification is very important to understand how the question of racism is not reducible, although this is a very fundamental question that I want to leave behind. The economic and the political, that is the question of citizenship right, question of you earning less money for the same work that someone else does just because you happen to be black or you happen to be Muslim, you have to mean something else, okay? So this kind of classification works, okay? So you have the West and the rest, okay? Works also at the level of aesthetics, pedagogy, epistemology. So you have epistemic racism, pedagogical racism, aesthetic racism. So you could go over all the different forms of social existence, and you could see again this question being put forward along the lines of the superior and inferior. And someone was saying the other day about publicity. You could see, Hatem was mentioning yesterday how he sees in the Muslim world publicity in the world. He was taking photos, you know. I believe he was in Qatar, I don't know where he was, but he mentioned something like that. And you could see the publicity where he sees white faces everywhere, okay? I've been in Latin America many times, you see the same thing, okay? White faces just in the publicity. It tells you something, okay, about what kind of aesthetic, the notion of beautiness and good taste, okay, is being privileged, and what kind of aesthetic is being inferiorized. Okay, these kind of things are not just peripheral, are relevant to understand logics or racial logics in societies. So the problem is the following. The problem is that then There are many implications about this structure. I don't have the time to develop, but there is one fundamental, there's several, but there's one that I want to emphasize here, and that is that when we talk about the West and the rest, the sort of being, non-being, superior, inferior, we're not talking anymore about the West as a geography, okay? If you take this notion as a geography, it was in the 16th century, it was a geography, okay? Because in the 16th century, when they did this colonial expansion, first to the Americas, then to Asia, then to Africa later, 300 years later to Africa, then Middle East in the 19th century, and so on, you know? So, at that moment, 16th century was a geography. You could make a clear sharp distinction between the West is there in Europe, the non-West is over here. The problem is that this notion, sort of being not being West and the non-West, is not anymore a geography. It's a hierarchy of domination that covers all the forms of social existence in which we are all implicated. Because after 500 years of this history, it has been internalized by everybody in the world, including people of the global south, including Muslims, including Yorubas, including Aymaras in the Americas, including Tojolabales in Mexico, including indigenous people in other parts of the world, including everybody. We are all inside that paradigm. Even people oppressed by that paradigm, even the people who are in the zone of non-being have internalized many of the epistemic structures, many of the aesthetic structure, many of the pedagogical structure, many of the spiritual structure, many of the etc., etc. So that's why decolonization, and that's another thing I wanted to mention to the brother, fortunately he's not here, decolonization is not just a critique to the West, an easy and simple critique to the West. That's very simple. Oh, the West are wrong, we are okay. No, it's an internal critique to ourselves, that we need to be pay attention to these things, because we are also implicated inside that structure after being colonized. And that what happened that now you have internal colonization of spiritualities and epistemologies that are considered non-Western, okay, that have been inferiorized by this structure where Eurocentric knowledge is considered superior, okay? Christians considered superior, non-Christian inferior, etc. But what happened is that now the people in the zone of non-being being racialized are going to reproduce structures that are coming from the West, internalized now inside the so-called non-Western tradition, and then be recycled as some kind of authentic Islam, authentic Aymara, authentic Bantu, authentic, and you go over all the cultures and all the epistemology and all the spiritualities around the world, and you could see versions of those cultures that are very much reproduction of the binaries of the West, but now inside. You get the point? And so this is why decolonization is a very difficult task. Because it's not as if you just say, oh, we just get rid, and that was another misunderstanding in the conversation. He was thinking of colonialism in the classical sense of a power that put a colonial administration, and then once you get rid of it, we are beyond colonialism. No. The problem is that you think about coloniality in this way I'm mentioning here, that structure of power that puts forward this structure of superiority inferiority. If you think about Western modernity as being that civilizational project that put forward this kind of structure of superiority inferiority along all these different forms of social existence, the problem is that once you get rid of the imperial power and now you are an independent country, now you are still reproducing a lot of the things you're fighting against just because, epistemically speaking, you have been colonized by the structures of knowledge of that power. And now you are supposedly doing anti-colonial thing, but reproducing everything you're fighting against. And that's one of the main failures of national liberation movements in the 20th century. Okay? That they were fighting, they were anti-colonial but not decolonial. In the sense that understanding that coloniality is not exhausted with the colonial administration. Coloniality goes in all the different areas of social life. Aesthetic, pedagogy, epistemology, spirituality, gender, sexuality, you name it. You could go over different areas of social life and you're going to see the reproduction of this kind of structure. Now, in terms of international migration, I wanted to clarify well this structure because there is another layer I don't have the time to develop, but basically what happened is that in the zone of being, the way the system operates in terms of forms of domination is through regulation and emancipation. That means that you're oppressed in the zone of being, okay? And remember, I'm not talking about geography, okay? Because you could have West, non-West reproduced inside the Muslim world in a third world country. You could have non-West, non-West inside Latin America in Brazil, okay? Because once you have this structure of power, it's not anymore a geography. This is now a social structure of power that is being reproduced everywhere around the world in different ways. That's why I don't disagree with the brother when he says, wait a minute, racism, I can see it here in Muslim country, I can see it there. Yes, of course. This is part of the problem, that it's not anymore the West over there, it's that we have the West inside us now. You know, and that requires a critical view that is also internal to ourselves. Okay, so it's not an easy thing of victimization in the sense of, oh, you know, we're the victim of this thing, they are the wrong one, we're the good ones. Wait a minute, this is more complex because we have internalized this also among people who are in the zone of non-being, also among people who are in the global south, also among countries and states that have imitated the West in the way they have put forward political structure, economic structure, and you name it, okay? So you have now halal capitalism, okay? Now you have, that kind of thing. So this is a form of fascination with Western modernity that we have internalized, and in that process we are inferiorizing ourselves and our own tradition, and you name it. So it creates a mess, because now you need to do not only a critique to the West, but also to do a critique to the West inside you. So this requires not only political economic decolonization, but also epistemic decolonization and spiritual decolonization, because our egos is really our egos, our nerves are sick, and part of decolonization is not only against outer structure, but also against inner structure. And we have to do the two at the same time. It's not that we first do one and then we do the other. We need to do the two at the same time. If you do only struggle against outer structure and don't deal with the inner structure, you become a Marxist. Okay? And we saw the disaster of that in the 20th century. You just go and deal with the outer structure, but you haven't dealt with the inner structure, and you reproduce all the monsters you're fighting against. Okay? And so you went from a worker revolution to Stalin. Okay? Etc. Okay? So if you only deal with your inner structure and don't deal with the outer structure, with questions of justice, you become New Age. That is what this movement called New Age among the West, where let's appropriate the spiritualities of the non-West, okay, to turn it into some kind of justification of, I'm going to finish in a second, to turn it into some kind of justification, I'm going to finish in a second and open for the floor for discussion. And turn it into some kind of internal colonization. But anyway, the point is that you have forms of regulation emancipation recognized to the oppressed in the zone of being. That gives them privilege, that gives them more resources. Even if you are oppressed in the zone of being, you have more privilege, you have more resources, you have etc. Because your humanity is recognized. So you have discourses of emancipation, autonomy, liberty, freedom recognized. You have regulation, workers' rights, labor rights, human rights, women rights, etc., recognized. But what happened in the zone of non-being is that the forms of administration of conflicts there in the system pass through other methods. And that is appropriation, dispossession, and violence. That means that because your humanity is not recognized, you're treated animal-like, and therefore the forms of domination there pass through appropriation of resources in the most overt way, and violence as a form of solving conflict. I have many examples to read, but I cannot go into that right now for lack of time. But these two material forms of domination is important to understand international migration. Because when you think about migration today, the people are crossing those borders who have no access to recognition of regulation emancipation. Every time there is a conflict, the solution is what? Appropriation and violence. And so this creates a situation, and this is racism. This is another thing that is missing in the conversation. Racism is a structure of domination that put in place a differential material way of administrating conflicts. In one side, the people whose humanity is recognized, they have access to regulation, methods of law, etc., and emancipation. In the other side, people whose humanity is not recognized, then the methods pass to other means, that is dispossession and violence. And these have to do everything with international migration, both from south to north as well as south to south. You could see the same thing happening in countries of the global south, reproducing this system of racism against the migrants coming to their countries and being put in place in very, very dehumanized situations. Okay? So racism is a form of dehumanization. Okay? And it has to do with the methods of domination put in place, and it has to do with the structure I've been calling superiority, inferiority along the line of the human. But anyway, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramon, for this very interesting speech. I think what I get out of the speech that there is a lot of work to do on ourselves and our understanding of things, and I think that the Muslims have maybe a big potential because they have a guidance who can help them to decolonize themselves, and I think here remains the importance to have this guidance and to have this, what we talked about the day before, the thawabit, the things that in this guidance are clear and are remaining, are immutable, because if everything becomes changeable, then the danger is that this guidance become itself colonialized by the, and this is what we see. We try to change what the things that are immutable to come to the same result that the West here is imposing us. So we try to read the text with the Western lens, because now everything can be played with. So this is where I think the Muslim potential is strong, because we have something to grab on and to help us to define who we are with our own lens. I will maybe give first the word if Dr. Ray has some comments on this or some questions, and then I will open the floor.
I only had one really. I very much like your analysis, which is again sociological, and except that the issue of Islamophobia, the word itself, part of the problem of the word Islamophobia, as with xenophobia, is that the term is medicalized, because as a phobia, it's a medical condition. And this, if you're going to associate Islamophobia with racism, it's problematic linguistically. So in a way, there needs to be another term, which is a racism against Islam or against Muslims. Islamophobia is an inappropriate term, because it is a weaker term as it's psychologized or medicalized as a phobia. And that's possibly why the French were able to say, you can be Islamophobic but not racist. That's part of the dilemma. I would.
So we have half an hour before the third session, and I suggest that we take 10 minutes of rest. Is this enough for you? So we can have 20 minutes of interventions. We will take the mic. So Who was first?
Very quick.
Very quick.
She was the first one.
Okay, we take the very quick question and then we go to the system.
So when you were talking about difference between women slavery and Asian slavery, you mentioned that in the past it wasn't universalistic. Did you mean economic dimension?
I take the question.
Sister,
I really wanted to get kind of a definition from Ramon about what is he actually referring to when he says the West, the West, the West. And I want to put it in context, actually from a time frame of the West. I'm from the West. I want to know who we're talking about and when the time frame started.
Very good question.
Thank you.
Very good. She finished.
okay, let's start with right, Sophia.
What's the mic?
Thank you, Dr. Ramon, for your insights. I just want to know regarding the internal critique. How do we go about critiquing our own traditions without reproducing coloniality, especially in my case with regards to gender and gender norms? For example, analyzing the legal tradition, Islamic legal tradition, and assumptions about women's bodies, spirituality, ontology, without reproducing that colonial mindset.
I was next.
We will come to the left.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I had a related question to the one on the West. It's just that if it's the West, it's not a geographical area anymore, then maybe we should think about redefining or having a new word to call whatever we're talking about that's colonizing us. So what are your take on that? And if there is an alternative word that we can use.
Send the mic to Whitney has a question.
Yeah, please.
I have a question and a comment what you said at the beginning, because you differentiated between institutional racism and stereotypes and prejudice. You said that actually institutional racism is what people's life is affecting. But I think as well as stereotypes affecting a lot of people's life, like for instance in Germany, a Muslim woman with hijab don't find a job. It even starts in the supermarket, just part-time, or Nazis. So maybe you can comment on that.
Okay, let's answer this one and let's continue with the round. First, why is slavery capitalized? Well, it's because it's inserted. It's capitalist because it's inserted in the slaves are inserted in a process of capitalist accumulation at a world scale. So it becomes an economic enterprise. That is, you bring them there, and they become a labor force that are not paid for the creation of commodities to be sold for a profit in the world market. This is the fundamental thing. Okay? In many of the parts of the world, like in the Muslim world, etc., in modern civilization before, because today we cannot say there is a Muslim civilization. Modern civilization was destroyed. Okay? What we have today is the Western-centric civilization that have colonized the world. Okay? There are Muslims culturally, epistemically, spiritually that still coexist. There are indigenous people. There are people who have survived the conquest in terms of their spirituality, testimony, all of that, but affected by many things too. It's not that we are in a pure outside to that. Okay, we were also affected by that, but it's not. You cannot call it a civilization because that was destroyed as a form of political power, especially after the fall of the Ottoman. You don't have anymore, something that you could say is exterior to this Western-centric war system created after 1492 in the political economy of the world. Okay, in the subjectivity, yes, there is exteriority there. That's why we're here. Okay, but in the political economy, it's problematic. So capitalist slavery is different from the form of slavery in Muslim civilization in the past. Most of the slaves were people capturing wars. Okay, And the people captured in war were put to do domestic labor, or even to do economic labor. But there were processes through which these slaves have rights, and processes through which you could stop being slaves, etc. Okay, I'm not celebrating slavery, okay, but I'm just calling attention to the qualitative difference between modern slavery and pre-modern slavery. Okay, using the example of Muslim, we can go to the Roman Empire, we can go to the Greeks. You could see slavery there didn't have the same structure in that modern slavery. This is very difficult for us to imagine today because our imagination has been so much, and our memory so much shaped by these Eurocentric paradigms and by this narrative of history so Eurocentric that it's difficult for us to imagine that the past could have been different from what we have today, you see? And it's very easy to fall into trans-historical sweeping statements about the world, you see? And think that what is today was in the past in the same way. It's not the case, but this is the way we've been educated to think, okay? And this is why I want to call attention to this, because it's one of the main weapons used to flatten down history, okay? And to flatten down qualitative difference in the social system that exists in civilization. The world we live today is centered on a particular civilization with a particular logics, etc., different from others, okay? But we need to account for that. We cannot just flatten down history and say everything was the same, okay? The West, the time frame, okay? There was no West before European colonial expansion. Okay? The idea of the West is a construction that came after 1492 and the European colonial expansion. There was no place in the world, in Africa, nobody called themselves blacks. In Latin America, nobody called themselves Indian. And in Europe, nobody called themselves white before 1492. Okay? There were other identities, other naming of territories. Okay? All the imagination, even the names we give today to geographies in the world, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, North America, Europe, etc. These are all modern colonial concepts that did not exist in the past in most parts of the world, okay? With a few exceptions here and there, okay? But this is a complete new frame that happened after the European colonial expansion after 1492. And then the question of the West is a civilizatory project where we're talking about power hierarchies at the economic level, at the political level, at the military level, at the cultural level, at the pedagogical level, at the spiritual level, at the aesthetic level, we can go on and on and on. That's why I refuse to talk about a capitalist world economy, capitalist world system. That's, for me, the white left talking, okay? We need to decolonize that language. I prefer to talk about a capitalist, patriarchal, Western-centric, Christian-centric, modern colonial world system. I prefer to use a long phrase at the risk of sounding ridiculous, okay? And call this a civilization with multiple forms of power that have been globalized. In my work of decolonizing political economy, I identified 15, 16 hierarchies of power. In the paradox of political economy, at the most, they identified 2, okay? At the most, okay? But the reason I'm calling attention to this is that the time frame of the West is a post-1492 phenomenon, okay? It didn't exist before. People in this part of the world didn't call themselves the West. This is something that came after. And it came as part of a narrative of history that was put forward to claim superiority over the rest. So, for example, what we call the West learned science, philosophy, etc. from Muslim civilization. Then, in their narrative of history, conceal that, hide that, okay, those boundaries, to make the claim that science, philosophy, knowledge is naturally, inherently European man, okay? And this is a post-1492 thing, okay? And so Copernicus, today we reread the great Copernicus, right? This is the great Copernicus. Well, Copernicus plagiarized the school of Baghdad that 600 years before have demonstrated that the Earth is not the center of the universe. Okay? That's the school of Baghdad, the astronomy school of Baghdad, with famous astronomers of the Muslim civilization, 600 years before Copernicus. Where he got that? Remember I talked about the burning of the books here?
Yeah.
Well, Cardenal Cisneros, here in Granada, in the Plaza Rambla, a few blocks from here, he will go with people who read Arabic, some Moriscos, who were Uncle Toms, okay? Who were together with the colonizers. You always have that in every colonial project. And they read Arabic, and they will take aside books that looks like technique, scientific, things like that. Take it aside and take it to the church, okay? And through the networks of the church, these books stay this way, this side, and that's how a lot of the scientists later on got this knowledge that later on got recycled as if it was naturally hidden European. And Copernicus is one of the greatest examples of that. Okay? I can go over many others. That they were taking knowledge, plagiarizing knowledge from elsewhere, okay, and then recycling it, okay, as natural inherently knowledge of the European man, okay? And in doing that, they need to invent a new narrative of history. They will say, the West, and this is the invention post-1492, begins with the Greeks, followed by the Romans, followed by Dark Ages, Middle Ages. Look at this. Dark Ages, they cannot name that. Then the Renaissance, then the Enlightenment. All these things have names except Dark Ages, Middle Ages. What is that? That's Islamic Renaissance in Europe. But they cannot call it that way. If they call it that way, they will have to acknowledge that they borrow all this knowledge from them. And if they acknowledge that, then the whole narrative of the West over the rest, superiority, inferiority, falls apart. Because that means that they learned from someone else that were supposedly no West, you see? And so the whole story falls apart. So in terms of time frame, this began with the European colonial expansion after 1492, and it got consolidated over time, especially 17th, 18th century, where this narrative of the West being these, Greeks, etc. We know that if you read Martin Bernal, Black Athena, you know that the Greek civilization 500 years before Jesus, peace be upon him, have nothing to do with what we call the West. It was a crossover of Phoenician, Persian, and other Egyptian civilizations. And so we have this kind of narratives that we need to pay attention to. So the West is a construction, and the reason I keep calling the West is because we need to know, to name the power that is at place in the civilization we're at. And we need to, the first thing is to acknowledge who is in power, what is the power, how it works, you see? And to name in the West, for me, is a political statement. It's like calling attention to Western modernity as the source of the problem. So that's why I believe that Western modernity is a central source of the problem we're living in the world today, as well as a central source of the problem we're living even in the interpretation we have done of our own sources and our own traditions, that they are not completely outside of that, okay? So we need to be careful there. That's why decolonization, that's why there is this potential, I like the word he used, of Muslim. Muslim has the tradition, the sources, etc., that allow you to grab on that, to move forward and do a radical questioning, okay, of this hegemonic Western civilization. But at the same time, you need to do it. It's a challenge to do this, because at the same time, you have on the one hand critiques you're doing to the Western imperial power, but also critiques you need to do internal to the tradition, because that tradition has been also, let's put it this way, also colonized by the West, and now you have versions of Islam that you want to run away through the door, when you hear them. There are just, if you look, for example, certain versions of Islam that are, colonization of the British, especially in the British side, you see people reproducing literal readings of the Quran using similar methods than the Islamic fundamentalist Protestant fundamentalists. So you have the Protestant fundamentalists coming through British colonialism, okay, entering certain part of the world for the last 200 years, And now you have version of Islam that looks archetypal as authentic Islam, but in fact they are a result of British colonization there. They are reproducing the same methods of reading the Bible of the Protestant fundamentalists that now are reproduced inside Islam, okay, with the force, and is linked to colonial imperial power. Because we know many of the versions are tied also to geopolitical alliances, okay, of the West with certain countries in the Middle East. So and so therefore the question about internal critique is fundamental to not fall into the trap of let's put it this way of I think that the most fundamental, I think there is, when we talk about Islamic Muslim reform, we need to pay attention, be careful not to fall into the trap of thinking that the problem are fundamentally the Muslims, okay? Because the central problem, we cannot lose sight of where the main problem is coming from the world today. It's Western modernity and Western civilization. That, as indigenous people in the world have called it, is a civilization of death. Because not only has it destroyed more human beings than any other system in history, but it has destroyed more forms of life than any other. We don't know if 100 years from now, which species will survive Western modernity. We don't know. We don't even know if there will be oxygen here 100 years from now. Okay? So that's why indigenous people, Aboriginal people will always say, this is a civilization of death. Okay? That's how they call it. And so we need to be careful in doing the work of Islamic reform, not to fall into the trap of thinking the problems are the Muslims. We need to think also about, yes, Islamic, Muslim reform. This is being very clear made by Tariq. Muslim reform has to take into account also this global structure of power that have produced all this power structure affecting the world we live today, but also have affected some of the internal readings inside the tradition, you see, and kind of, let's put it this way, maybe the word distorted some of the readings, you know, and that part of the struggle inside Islam today is a struggle of definitions, a struggle of Muslim reform that is not the link from that colonial history. That's why I'm insisting, yes, you could go back in history and look at the Shia Sunni division, look at it, but wait a minute. Over centuries, Shia and Muslim and Sunnis, over a long time, were living together in peace. How come now suddenly we have these crazy Sunni Shia wars? I'm sorry, but you cannot delink Western modern imperial powers from those divisions. They are putting money, resources, and military weapons to make this to happen. And so we need to be very careful, you know, when we think about Shia-Sunni conflict, like the brother was talking about, which I like his dissertation a lot, but making sweeping statement, transhistorical statement over history, because yes, that conflict happened, there was, you know, we can look at it, criticize it, but then we cannot derive what is happening today from that. Because they were living together for centuries in peace, despite those differences. Why is it that now there is this wars going on? You know, Shia, Muslim, that kind of thing. Who is fueling this? How is this happening? Without losing sight of the responsibility of the actors too. Okay, I don't want to dismiss that. But which versions of Islam in the Sunni world are the ones taking this radical anti-Shiism to the point of going to war and even nuke Iran and that kind of thing? So anyway, this is the.
Thank you, Ramon. I don't think we will have the time for a second round. So I saw the brother who is wanting. I think we will have 2 hours discussion this afternoon. So you can keep your.
Yeah, no, great.
So anyhow, we have 10 minutes now until the third session. So I think we will take a break, and we will have enough time, inshallah.
The stereotype, I answered that at the beginning, the issue about stereotypes. I don't think stereotypes is enough. We need institutions putting it in place. It's not that I like stereotypes, it's that it's not enough. That's all. The issue about the law against the rape is a state racism. These are laws put in place by the state. It's not just stereotypes. Yeah, we'll talk about it later.